Hello and welcome. You're tuned into the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm your host, Dave Schrader, along with me, Tim Dennis. A little bit later on in the show, a brand new edition of Theater of the Mind. It's back. We had a lot of people upset with us last week, Tim, that we didn't present a brand new Theater of the Mind.
No, really?
Yeah, we did. But as I said, listen, we were kind of under the gun. We were at a live event. We were doing a lot of things. The show was pushed out a day. And with all the interesting stories that John Tenney told, I kind of felt like we were getting live Theater of the Mind. And I want to remind people of that real quickly. We are working together to do a live intention experiment. I'm talking to Chris Jericho in the next day or two here. He's been very excited about wanting to do something big scale and weird on the Jericho cruise. So we're going to do that and do this intention experiment, and we're going to see if we can bring up a UFO or a USO while we're in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle.
Ah.
Yeah?
I like it.
And we've got some people in Detroit that John Tenney works with and some other groups from around the United States that heard about our intention experiment. They want to be a part of this. We're going to talk about it on Midnight in the Desert. And I'm going to even reach out to our buddy George Norrie on Coast to Coast and tell him what we're looking to do and see if he wants to get his audience involved in this. But I think we're gonna try something really big scale here and see if we can't make something happen. It's the Bermuda Triangle, Halloween week, Tim.
Yeah.
If anything's going to happen, that's going to be the time.
That'll be it.
So that's what's going on. We've got a brand new Theater of the Mind today. But before we get launched into today's episode, Tim, I've got to preface this.
Okay. All right.
I host Monday through Friday, Midnight in the Desert, which you know you're going to be filling in for me in September here while I'm gone to Romania. You're going to be sitting in. Mm-hmm. So you'll be doing double duty. And 2 weeks ago, on a Monday night, we have a guest on for the first hour. Our second hour is going to be spent with our next guest. And he's our guest today on the show. And we're okay at the top of the hour break, Tim. This is kind of behind the scenes baseball I'm about to give you, right?
Okay.
So we do our first hour. We go to the top of the hour break, and I'm in my studio here at home, and my wife is bringing me a fresh cup of ice cold water, and we're chatting, and all of a sudden we hear extremely loud music just blaring down the hall. And the two of us look at each other, and I'm thinking, which one of my goofy kids got up and can't sleep, so they decided to flip the TV on at full blast, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I give her the signal to go check. And she goes walking down the hall, but leaves my studio door open. So it's really loud. And I look at my clock. I've got less than 30 seconds. Now, my mic is live. Even though we're potted down, you can't hear us on air. My guest, Mark, can hear me. And I yelled at my wife. I go, shut the door, right?
All right.
So she runs back and shuts the door for me, goes back out there to deal with this, and then I hear blaring music again. And I'm like, what the hell? So what had happened was during the hold tight. So I bring the guest on, and we're going to talk about egregores, which we did. We finally had him back on Midnight in the Desert last night to talk about this topic, and then on Friday night. And then here he's with us today on Beyond the Darkness to talk about Poltergeists and Possessions. So we're talking. We get about 12 minutes into the episode, Tim,
mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden, all my systems shut down. I'm completely cut off from the show. My internet's down. Everything's down. We start doing some looking. My wife is contacting the internet company. There's no outages in our area. We talked to our neighbors the next day. Nobody else had issues or outages. It was my house alone. Boom, we're down. We're out. I can't get anything to work again. So I call Mark, and I explained to him. I said, hey, Mark, I'm really sorry about this. And he goes, this hasn't happened, or this has happened to me before. And I'm like, what? So we chat a little bit about that. We're going to have him come on and explain some of the story as well. But here's what happened at the top of the hour. when we started to hear the music, my wife goes marching out into the living room expecting to yell at one of our melon-headed children for being so loud and obnoxious so late at night. And there's nobody there. The TV is on and the volume level is going up by itself. All the remotes are right there on the table, Tim. Okay? Mm-hmm. So the volume goes up. Now, if that's not weird enough, as she's standing there, and I don't think I told Mark this, the DVD player turns on and the drawer starts opening and shutting and opening and shutting and opening and shutting. And she's, you know my wife, she's not afraid of much, but she's a little imp of a woman, right? Mm-hmm. So she starts getting unnerved. She reaches over, turns off the DVD player, turns off the TV. She starts to come back to tell me, and both turn back on, and the volume starts going up on the TV again. So she goes back out, turns them both off. She's unnerved, rattled. She comes back in, and all she can mouth to me, because I'm now on the air, is, there was no one out there. And I'm like, what? And she just said, I'll tell you at break. So I got to power through this first segment with my guest so I can find out what the hell's going on in my house. That's when we get about 12, 15 minutes into the interview. And my guest starts to talk about the Catholic Church and some of these beings. And boom, that's when everything shuts down on us. And we lose complete contact. Now, we've been doing the show for 12 years, right?
Yep.
Beyond the Darkness. And we've had a few weird instances over the years of things going on during the show that we would fit into that kind of paranormal realm. It doesn't happen often, and it's usually not that pronounced.
Right.
Right?
Right.
In all honesty, I think the weirdest, if I'm right, I mean, we had something strange on our very first episode when we had Jason Hawes from Ghost Hunters. For some reason, he started getting Spanish music piped in over his line. We had to do the interview on two phones, one so he could talk to us and answer, and then he had to listen to the questions on the other phone. But he's getting like Spanish music pumping up at him. Mm-hmm. We finally got that rectified about halfway, 3/4 of the way through the show.
Yep.
But we couldn't figure out how it happened, what was going on. And then I think the next month we had Grant Wilson on, and something weird happened during his visit with us. And he was also from the TV show Ghost Hunters. And then the real weird part was, I think the trifecta, we had Steve Gonzalez on a month later from Ghost Hunters, and we had some weird technical glitches happening while we were talking to him. So that was kind of an interesting little twist and a good way to start off our series, 2006. But then we did an interview, I think it was about 3 years ago maybe now, with Betty Andreessen Luca, right? Mm-hmm. And she was the UFO abductee. Do you remember this story, Tim?
Yeah.
And we're talking with her and her husband, and they're telling us about all this weird activity. And she gets done telling her story, and her husband starts to talk. And I very clearly, through my really good headphones, hear this. And I said, oh, hey, Betty, I'm sorry, did you say something? And she's like, no. And I said, I asked her husband, I go, did she just whisper something to you? He goes, no, we're not even in the same room. I can see her, but no, we're not talking. And I said, no, I just heard something, and you didn't even believe me. So we went to break. Tim goes back to listen and isolates. He sees this very small blip in the audio file, and then comes back and he goes, I see something. I'm going to check it out. And he boosts the volume, and he comes back and goes, Dave, I've got something weird here. So as the husband starts to tell the story, you hear this feminine voice that's not Betty go, I'm going to kill you. Do you remember that, Tim?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And that was really uncanny and weird. So that was one of the most profound, bizarre experiences until 2 weeks ago, when all hell broke loose in my house, Tim.
Huh.
And I've not one time has anything like that happened since. Now I will say this. This last Monday, at about 12:15 again, my internet went down, but it went down for about 30 seconds and then came right back up. So it was around the exact same time, but shortly after we mentioned that Mark would be coming back. So bear that in mind, right? So braving it, Tim, I figured, well, let's really go for the double whammy. So we had him on Friday night to talk about egregores and really kind of bizarre creatures, the occult entities. And then he agreed to come here with us today to talk about poltergeist and possessions. And I actually had some friends that do some energy work try to put some protection around me and the show, so that, and I know that may sound funny to some people, but I wanted to get through this entire program without any kind of technical weirdness or glitches. So hopefully we're going to get through this one as well as we did last night or Friday night show. So with that said, let's get started. Mark Stavish is the founder and director of studies of the Institute for Hermetic Studies, established in 1998. The Institute holds instructional programs on general spirituality, esotericism, hermeticism, alchemy, Kabbalah, astrology, and parapsychology. Stavish holds undergraduate degrees in communications and theology and a master's in counseling, and he has over 40 years' experience in spiritual practices and has published 30 books, many of which have been translated into one or more of 9 languages. He's here with us today to talk about poltergeists and possessions. Mark, thank you so much for coming back to the show.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. And it is good to know that, of course, I get the gold star for weirdness. So
yes, you are an overachiever in the weird world of paranormal radio. So to get you, I caught you up to all the weird things that were going on. And I'm not one to jump because I don't like to look like a goof when I say something paranormal happened and it's not paranormal. So I'm very careful on how we represent this. But the fact that the TV turned on twice, the volume was going up by itself, my DVD player. Now I've had people reach out to me and tell me somebody hacked your system. But I thought, well, it's really strange that they were able to shut down my internet while messing with my TV and DVD player and doing all this. So is that a possibility? Maybe. But it just doesn't seem like that's the real deal, Holyfield. Oh, and I forgot to mention the next night, Mark, as we're talking about what happened the night before, my wife is over doing some work and she's sitting, 10 feet away from me. And she's got her headphones on listening to the show. And she pulls her headphones off and listens. She hears a female scream. And she thought it was one of my daughters, maybe saw a spider in their room. So she gets all flustered and goes down to tell them to be quiet. We're doing the show. And everybody's sound asleep in the house. I did not hear the scream because I was mid-talk and, I've got my own headphones on, my volume all the way up. So I didn't hear the scream. But that really unnerved her twice. So this happens to you regularly. You get a lot of weird activity that takes place when you do these type of interviews. As a matter of fact, you were on Coast to Coast with our buddy George Norrie, and you had some weird stuff happen, right?
Yeah, it's true. And in fact, folks don't know it because it happened during the break. They have a long commercial break at the top of the hour. And it was just, there's 3 beeps that occur when they hang up on you at the end of a show often. And that's what I got, boom, boom, boom. And that was it. So I'm calling back their emergency number. They're calling me. And we had to finish up the interview on my cell phone. And the producer said, what happened? What did you hear? What went on? And I told him, and of course there was no explanation for it. I have to say that's not uncommon around these 2 particular topics, whether it's egregores or the notion of poltergeists and obsession and possession. And often when I'm getting calls from people about it, we'll routinely be disconnected. I was talking to one researcher, a very nice fellow, a state police detective and researcher in this area, and also author and radio host. And I think we were 9 times, 10 times we were disconnected during that call. That's not uncommon around these particular themes, and other kinds of high weirdness, too, that also affect the area around you. I mean, I have great kids, but the night of our show, and they are teenagers, my one kid is just having a breakdown, half an hour before we're going to go on the air. And, of course, it was nothing serious. It was no big deal, kind of just adolescent-y stuff. But that's how it happens. You notice why now? Why this timing right now is the question we ask. And I have to say this, a lot of people get into this field, and I joked with you about it. It's all real until suddenly it's real.
Right, right, exactly. How did you get introduced to the field to kind of bring our listeners up here on Beyond the Darkness up to speed? What got you involved and interested in the strange and supernatural?
Well, as a child, I grew up in an environment where classical esotericism and mysticism was part of the phenomena. That is, on my mother's side of the family, they were practitioners of German folk magic, and my great uncle was involved, and I grew up next to him, involved in almost all of the major esoteric movements of the early and mid 20th century for his whole life, as well as again learning traditional German folk magic. So and astrology. So this was not uncommon to me, but the important point is it was not the way many people approach the weird and the high strange now. It was not something you actually went out and sought to find. Yes, it happened, you understood it had a place, but you didn't go looking for it. And what I had found later on, of course, as I'm doing a lot of writing, we're writing about positive things. We're writing about spirituality as a force to improve your life, to know yourself better and improve your life. But there is a side to it, no matter what practice you undertake, that is a bit tricky. So we ended up writing, 2 books, 2 monographs. One was called Pathology of the Sublime, which is about things that go wrong on the spiritual journey, and the other was Studies in Poltergeists.
Are you kidding me with this, Tim?
Is he still there?
The minute he goes to mention poltergeists, his audio dumps on us again. Very strange.
Wow.
Yeah, man, this is a head trip. Maybe he just really doesn't want to do these interviews anymore, and he just pretends, Tim, to be dealing with the paranormal. I don't know. That is just very strange. I'll work to get him back on the line here as as we go. But what a very bizarre situation. I know you're more of the skeptic between the two of us. Yeah, we're here. Welcome back. There you go. The minute you mention poltergeist, boom, you're gone.
Yep.
Okay, that's freaky.
I told you that's weird. Okay. Yeah, let's get back into it. So you were just starting to mention about poltergeist, so please go ahead.
I don't even know where we got dropped.
Right when you started to talk about poltergeist, literally you said the word poltergeist and you were gone. Yeah,
so, if I start at the right place, I had encountered a lot of folks, as well as my own people who were involved in spiritual practices, who were having phenomena that they didn't quite understand. So we ended up writing 2 monographs, as I said, Pathology of the Sublime, for problems that can occur on your spiritual path, but also the really things that really do go wrong, which was Obsession, Possession, or Studies in Poltergeist, Obsession, and Possession, the book we're talking about now. And one of the problems is people get involved in these practices, and they want to go out ghost hunting, and they don't understand. You don't go walk into a jungle without a map, a guide, or a weapon. And that's what they're doing. You don't undertake a spiritual path and think that everything's just going to be fine and dandy. It's not all light and bliss. So trying to help people recognize problems, feel comfortable talking about them, but also finding solutions to them is what those books are about and what we're talking about today.
Tim, you a little unnerved by that or what?
It's interesting. I'm not unnerved. I find it highly interesting, though. Yeah.
We joked when when your audio left us, Mark. I said, well, if he doesn't want to do interviews about this, he doesn't have to pretend to keep getting disconnected. All right, poltergeist. Talk to us a little bit about this and your study into it. Certainly we've heard it mentioned. We've talked about it on our show with many different experts. But what do you bring?
What people need to understand is that they're not alone in the universe. And as human beings, we often think of ourselves only in terms of other human interaction. We occasionally think of animals because we have pets or because we eat them. We occasionally give lip service to the notion of an afterlife or possibly ghosts. But most people go through the day, and this includes a lot of parapsychologists and ghost hunters, with a really very narrow metaphysical view, and one that is not rooted in any of the many traditional studies or traditional practices, whether it be alchemy, Kabbalah, Indian Tantra, Tibetan Buddhism, Taoism, or other systems. So they often will encounter this strange phenomena, and it's so exciting that they want more of it. You see that happening all the time with folks who they're bored and, maybe they're drinking a little bit, and they say, let's play with the Ouija board. Now, usually they scare themselves and they stop. Thank you. Sometimes they don't. And then problems start. So we have to recognize that we share this world with a host of invisible beings that we may not even know are there. So we have to be careful in our thoughts and in our actions. And with that, just because they're dead doesn't mean they're wiser than us or they're going to be friendly towards us.
The idea too that we're trying to engage with the spirit world, and by calling on the spirit world, it might be opening this conduit to energy. Is it necessarily bad, or is it just a different form that doesn't resonate with us, and that's what
both
appears bad?
Both. There's the nature that if you're doing this without traditional studies behind you, you don't understand the relationship. So you're really going into a foreign culture and don't understand why you shouldn't shake hands with your left hand, or something like that. So you send out all the wrong signals in that regard. That's why in traditional studies, there's meditation on specific beings, specific energies or planets or ideas, so that we don't just tap into this great energy source, but we narrow it down to a specific focus. It's like dialing a number and saying, look, I want to talk to the doctor because I want to talk about, my illness, or calling a lawyer who specializes in patent law because that's what you're after, rather than just dialing a number randomly. And what many people do is when they want to contact spirit, as some call it the spiritual world, it's really no different than just throwing their doors open and their windows, putting a sign out, nobody's home, please don't steal anything. So you don't know who you're going to get or what's going to walk in. Yeah.
Now, have you, starting to investigate this phenomena and reporting on it, writing on it, did that begin to open up weirdness in your life?
Most definitely. And the good news was I wasn't shocked by it. I wasn't surprised by it and was able to dismiss it fairly easily. And I don't say that casually either. I mean, it takes a little bit of effort and a good mind. But that's only because of my experience in meditation and ritual and prayer that I knew what to do. And that phenomena is very common. I mean, Gustav Davidson, the author of A Dictionary of Angels, he spoke very openly of being what he called bedeviled by angels when he was writing that book. The kind of things he would just encounter while walking across a room or across a field. Robert Masters, the husband of Jean Houston, he wrote a book called Eros and Evil, Sexual Pathology of Witchcraft. And he talked very openly about when he was writing that book in a cabin in Arkansas, in the Ozarks, how this place was just a disaster. Everything around him was fine, but his house was just crawling with insects or dead animals would show up, the grass wouldn't grow, all these things that were identical to the phenomena that he was researching, and then when he stopped the book, everything ended. So what that tells us is that our mind is a transmitter of energy, and we do attract to ourselves what we focus our mind on, intentionally or unintentionally. So we have to learn the nature of our own mind and how to control it before we start going into parapsychic research.
Right, and I think a lot of people are trying to get that feel, and they're fascinated by the otherworldly experiences. They're fascinated by making communication, but like you said, it's not like we're just automatically plugging into the phone board and we get grandma. You're plugging into a cosmic phone board without knowing what's on that other line, who's going to come through, and what you might be engaging. And there is danger involved in messing in this field without taking proper precautions and knowing what you're doing. So with that said, what do you do to start protecting yourself before you start doing investigative work or research on topics like this?
Well, first of all, I have a regular meditative practice. So every day I have a meditative and ritual practice to remind myself of the nature of my own mind, and that everything is essentially, no matter what I see, perceive, or experience, that it is transient in nature. Because some of the stuff you will experience can be very frightening. You just have to not buy into it. You not have to participate in it. And this is where we find within poltergeist phenomena and even obsession and possession, people get a great deal of specialness out of it. They feel special, and so do the people who investigate it. That's the problem too, and that's what we want to get into, is how they attract psychic parasites to themselves and go off the rails because they don't have, they think they have protection, but they really don't. So I have a regular practice that I do.
You mentioned that, and Tim, I think we can attest to the fact that we know a lot of really very beautiful people in the paranormal field, and I don't mean physically attractive, but in the sense of just really beautiful spirits. But we've watched some of these quote-unquote sensitives who believe they've got it down and understand what they're doing de-evolve and just start shaking apart, falling apart at the seams, their lives go into a tailspin. And to me, that's been a fascinating aspect. And I'm like, wow, this is somebody who claims to be working in the light and is trying to make other people's lives better by making these communications and connecting. And you can watch them go from happy, healthy to sick, alcoholic, drug-addled, bankrupt. It's really kind of a bizarre feature. And I didn't know is that the ego getting in the way? Is that something else? Or is it kind of these, as you mentioned, parasites that are bleeding them dry?
It's a little bit of all of it. Now, when we say ego, think of it this way so everyone knows what we're talking about. Ego is whatever we identify with. Now, remember what I said at the beginning of my meditation. I remind myself of the nature of my own mind. Okay? I remember as a child, my great-uncle would say, Moses went up to the mountain and saw the burning bush. And it was God. And he said, "Who are you?" And God responds, "I am that I am." And my joke is that certainly cleared things up for him now, didn't it? But what is the greatest thing we can say in our lives is, I am. And of course, in different schools of yoga, the meditation is Tat Sat Om, I am that, I am Om. Now what I'm telling you here is that when we say I am and we let it go, then we're open and we're free or freer. But what happens is when we say I am and then fill in the blank, that's when all our problems begin. I am happy, I am sad, I am rich, I am poor, I am fill in whatever that blank is. So when we have spiritualists and people involved in spiritual studies like this who heavily identify with their role, okay, it becomes an obstacle. And that's what we mean by ego. And they don't really understand what's going on in their own heads or why they're doing things. And, of course, the invisible sees you energetically for as you are, even if you don't see yourself for the way you are. And that's one of the things that has to be understood. I was talking to Shannon Taggart a few weeks ago, and she's a wonderful researcher in spiritualism. And she was telling me about many of the problems that spiritualist mediums have in terms of physical health and mental health, because, of course, it just breaks down. They're treating this like a technique or a method in which they're a free channel that the water goes through and unaffects, but it's not really that way.
Right, that channel starts to erode, right? Like water rubbing down the rocks, it starts to erode what you are as a person.
Well, that's correct. That's why you see in ceremonial magic, you do these rituals of purification or banishing, where in Tibetan Buddhism and Vajrayana in particular, you do the Vajrasattva practice, which is a practice of purification. And you're constantly doing this, okay, with the idea that you are reminding yourself not only the purity of your own mind, but to actually, in fact, keep your psychic channels, what we call chakras, okay, the channels and the chakras, the psychic centers, clean and unobstructed. And in the book, Studies in Poltergeists, at the end of it, there's a meditation. It's kind of a variation of a fire practice, a purification practice for people to do so they can keep their channels pure. So it's very important that people involved in psychic research have those kinds of practices in place so they can literally burn off the dross that they may accumulate when they go places.
All right, we're going to go a little deeper into this and learn more about poltergeist, some of the stories, case studies, things that you covered as well. All right, we're back. Mark Stavish, our guest. We're going to do a little theater of the mind in a bit. Poltergeist activity. And, I've noticed that in a lot of cases of paranormal activity, especially in cases where there's possession believed, there seems to be poltergeist activity in conjunction with it. Do you know, in the case of the chicken and the egg, does poltergeist activity begin first and start to ramp up, or does it seem that once somebody is possessed or oppressed and dealing with something, that the poltergeist activity kind of comes off of that, Mark?
I think what happens is people somehow get oppressed, we'll say. That is, for whatever reason, they have attracted some entity or entities to themselves. The emotional and mental decline then access food or facilitates these entities, whereby then the paranormal phenomena, with the poltergeist or what have you, is able to occur. And then with that, over time, depending on how severe it is, then it can move into what we call full-blown possession, where the person is no longer in complete control of their body or their mind, and they're kind of shuttered off to a corner, if you will, in a sense. So that phenomena acts as a mechanism, because the person must engage, they must participate, and that happens through either ignorance, like, hey, this is fun, let's do this, but also the emotions of fear. These things feed off fear and sorrow and negative feelings. That's why a good spiritual practice that encourages warmth, compassion, love, generosity act as a strong buffer against them.
Now, the poltergeist style activity, which I know we're going to talk quite a bit about here, can you give me a definition, truly? I mean, some people say it's ghostly activity. Some people just say it's psychokinetic activity given off by an individual. Do we really have an understanding at this point in 2018 of what poltergeist activity is, or is it kind of a catch-all phrase for anomalous activity?
Yeah, it's just a catch-all phrase for anything that happens that moves, some kind of physical activity phenomena that moves, because any way of knowing whether it's an invisible being or not is going to be subjective. We don't have an objective way to date, at least one that's agreed upon. We can't even agree that these things exist. How are we going to agree that they're actually acting and moving in our world? So the phenomena itself is the key point. And in fact, I really don't get involved with anything until everything else has been ruled out. I don't go on random hunts. I only have people call me after they've ruled everything else out, and very specific paranormal phenomena has occurred, like something poltergeist or precognition or clairvoyance of some kind. Otherwise, I don't get involved until everything else has been ruled out.
How do you define that it's true poltergeist activity and not just somebody's overactive imagination taking something that could be natural, but they're so amped up and fearful that they're believing this is something in the supernatural or preternatural sense?
Yeah, again, and for myself, I don't have that problem because that's already been ruled out. If something is literally flying across the room or getting pulled off a wall and it's being witnessed, then there's no question. It's generally not being faked. It takes too much effort for people to fake that kind of thing. What we found is in a lot of this research is that people who are engaged, who have the problems of spiritual problems that we call obsession and possession, poltergeist, you have to understand they generally don't have a spiritual life. There's a lot of criteria that follow through. I mean, there are exceptions to the rule, but they generally don't have a spiritual practice. That's the first thing. And if you look at their lives, they've been engaged in a variety of traumas and crises that often precipitate these things. So emotionally, they're already set up for this kind of stuff.
So do you think that poltergeist activity then is kind of a PTSD of the supernatural?
That's a good way to put it. I would think about that. That sounds very plausible, because there has to be a cause and an effect. And these beings, that we talk about, whether ghosts or poltergeist, angry, or demons, they don't interact in our world easily, because if they could, they would. So they need a mechanism in, and that's where the human being, the victim, the patient, the identified person comes in. There's got to be a mechanism for them to interact.
Right, and that's what I wonder is, what is the key that turns it on in some people and not in others? What is?
If you look at
is it always them dabbling or an interest? Because there are some people who don't have any fascination in the paranormal, yet they have this activity begin in their life.
Oh, sure. And that may just be, a natural psychic sparking. It may not be some spiritual entity. So, that's the point, too. Does the phenomena just kind of come and go and nothing really comes of it? But when we see things deteriorate, when we see their lives deteriorate, their mental health deteriorate, their physical health deteriorate, everything go down around them, then we got to look at something else. Who really benefits from this? What kind of, as we said, being or beings might be involved? And this is where we have to watch, environments. I can look at an environment and pretty much predict what kind of invisible beings are feeding there. And anyone who has enough experience can as well. Because just as we go into a church and we try to think our best thoughts and we burn incense and we create a beautiful environment, and we do so in our homes, in our home sanctums, our home environments, we try to create an avenue where beauty comes in and harmony and health and happiness and illumination. Well, these things go in the opposite direction.
All right, well,
so when we say cleanliness is next to godliness, and pick your friends, carefully, it's not just an old lie. It's just not an axiom from your grandmother. I mean, there's a real truth to it.
So kind of anarchy is kind of an open invitation to the supernatural or paranormal. If things are out of order, so. It makes you start to wonder if things like feng shui really do have an important play in keeping energy lines open. And if you've got clutter and insanity at your house, if that's going to be kind of an open door policy for chaotic energy.
Well, that's our joke. For the most part, not exclusively, but for the most part, almost all these places where this kind of really bizarre phenomena takes place, they're not well kept. They're kind of dirty. There's the usual what you would think of as problems. And even if the general house is clean, the place where it's taking place isn't.
Gotcha.
The room or the basement or something like that. So really cleanliness, because remember, form follows function. And we talk about as above, so below, as below, so above. This energies follow the structures we set for them, and then the structures adapt to the energies as they flow. That's why, good classical training in spirituality, metaphysics, occultism is important to understand that, because then you can quickly and very easily perceive, where the problems are, both in the physical environment, but also in the person.
Well, it again makes you wonder, is that a form of oppression? Is the spirit realm attaching to somebody, breaking them down to make it easier for this kind of energy to take place? Is it, kind of subtle ways at first? Because you hear about a lot of these people are everyday normal people, and then all of a sudden their lives start to kind of turn around and they get upended. And that's when all this activity explodes.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what happens. And of course, the other thing is we don't always know a lot about their lives. What I've found is people always lie. They lie constantly.
Hey, why are you looking at me when you say that, Stavish? All right, let's do this. We're going to continue our examination in just a few minutes, but right now it's time to go deep into the Darchives with a brand new story. This is one shared by me, Darkness Dave, and our good friend Jeff Belanger here on Theater of the Mind.
Today's story is the real-life experience of Darkness Radio's Dave Schrader and Jeff Belanger, the ghost investigator of Gettysburg. 7 years ago, we were attending speakers of the very popular phenomenology event based in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. As everyone knows, the town is reported as a hotbed of strange paranormal activity, from ghostly soldiers still seen locked in eternal battle to the phantom sounds of gunfire and cannon fodder. Every location has its own unique place in history and its own supernatural situations unfolding within it. This one particular night, after the convention had ended for the day, there was a public ghost hunt of many of the famed locations in town. Researcher and investigator Jeff Belanger and I were to be stationed in a very unusual spot, a house that had been built on the site of the Eisenhower Hotel property. According to the staff, workers would be frightened out of the house. Things would move on their own. People would witness shadows moving about in the empty home. and so much more. It was close to the hotel and had a weird enough story that Jeff and I were looking forward to the 4-hour-long investigation with some of the paid attendees of the event. We met that night in the front room of the house. We told the stories of the location as they had been related to us by the workers, management staff, and employees of the Eisenhower Hotel. There was a level of excitement and anticipation buzzing in the crowd that night as Jeff and I prepared the crew for the hunt. The group was broken into 3 smaller groups and spread throughout the house. Hour by hour ticked away with nothing of major note taking place. An occasional stray knock or whisper was reported, but nothing was seen up until the final hour of the investigation. There was no EVP or photographic evidence uncovered, and we were all left feeling just a little bit flat. For the final hour, only a select few of the die-hard investigators were still on hand. Some wanted to strike out on their own, others decided to work with the 2 of us to see if we could stir up some activity before the night was out. Jeff looked around in a contemplative manner and said,
"Hey man, I've been policing the upstairs for most of the night. Let's take a group to the basement and see what we can get down there."
With that, we were off to the basement. The door creaked, and the stairs groaned as we made our way through and down to the belly of the dormant beast. We spent around 30 minutes milling around, attempting EVP sessions and the like, and the crowd of tired observers slowly dissipated, electing to go back to the hotel for a nightcap and some much-needed sleep. It was down to just 4 of us in the basement: Jeff, myself, and 2 stalwart female investigators. Jeff noticed the dark, cramped crawl space. He pointed and said,
"Okay, Dave, we've put it off long enough. Time to go deep."
We all turned to see the strange hole cut halfway up the basement wall, revealing a small crawlspace entry. Jeff was in first, followed by our 2 guests, and then I pulled my achy old bones up with a grunt into the extremely dark hole. We climbed all the way back in, putting our backs up against the cold back wall, obviously to avoid a specter grabbing us from behind. We made some small talk as we got settled in. Jeff piped up and said,
"So ladies, come to this hole in the wall often?"
We all let out with a small chuckle and then decided to attempt an EVP session. Jeff began to explain.
So EVP is electronic voice phenomena, the recording of disembodied voices and anomalous sounds we can't hear with our ears. So let's take turns asking questions, round-robin style.
We tried and got no responses on the first go-around. We listened to the steady hiss of the recorder's playback as we asked our questions, but heard no reply. When we looked up, we saw one of the other investigators standing at the mouth of the crawlspace, the ambient light from outside outlining our latecomer. Without missing a beat, the always friendly Jeff beckoned,
"Hey, welcome. Come on, crawl on in, pull up a piece of filthy ground and join us."
The ghost investigator quickly crawled into the hole and entered the space with us. He shot quickly into the darkness off to my immediate right. We gave him the short rundown. "We're going to do a short EVP session, so feel free to ask any questions you may have," I stated. "But please, find a comfortable spot and just sit still. We want to be as quiet as we can." We heard our new addition settle in and then let out a sigh. Once again, we began asking questions, Jeff and I alternating, allowing plenty of time for the guests to pipe in. After a few minutes, Jeff asked,
"Hey, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask?"
There was just silence. Jeff spoke up again.
"Do you want to introduce yourself and see if the spirits will acknowledge you?"
Again, we were surrounded by silence. Jeff reached into his pocket and revealed a small mag flashlight and shone it to the spot that our guest had settled in. There was no one there. Just the 4 of us, dumbfounded. There was clearly only one way in and one way out. The person never left. We would have seen them or heard them. It didn't take long for us all to beat a hasty retreat from our claustrophobic confines. It wasn't until we left the house, quickly closing the door behind us, and got to the safety of the bright lights of the Eisenhower Hotel that we dared listen back to the recording sessions. Now we could hear the invitation for the being to join us. We noticed it was right after we had asked for the spirits to give us a sign that they were there. Because of the activity in the house with all the living bodies moving around, we'd never second-guessed that the sign we had asked for had actually appeared. We just assumed it was one of the other investigators. But we heard on the recording the being crawl in through that opening, settle in, and then that loud sigh. But there was never a response to any of the asked questions. No sound of the being leaving. just the sounds of our gasps when we realized that night the hunters had become the hunted.
Beyond the darkness.
Hello, welcome back. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm glad to have a brand new Theater of the Mind. I hope you guys enjoy it. And now get off our backs. You got it back, for God's sakes, Tim. These people are so needy. Gimme, gimme, gimme. But that was a cool story. That one actually took place, and that was one of those, that when you start wondering, why do I do this? That was one of those moments for me that really, when you start to feel like, there's nothing going on, maybe I'm hallucinating, and then you have that experience with a group of people. That was kind of a cool segment. We're talking with our guest today, Mark Stavish, and we're talking about poltergeist possession and the kind of these strange correlations between them. Before we get back into that, I do want to mention, hey, Tim, how would you like $500 cash money?
I'd love it. Do you have $500 for me?
I don't, but you do, and we're going to give it away this January 1st.
You're giving away my money?
I think it's best to do it that way, Tim. I think it's always best to be, it's better to give than to receive. And I just figured it'd be better if you gave instead of receiving. So, I want to make your life more complete and whole. So this is what we're going to do. For all of our listeners, if you want to subscribe to our True Crime Tuesday podcast, all you have to do is go to darknessradio.com, click on the True Crime Tuesday banner, and subscribe now. If you have already subscribed, great. Stay with us. If you're a new subscriber, great. Stay with us and maintain your membership until January 1st. It's $4.99 a month. It's going to give you access to 4 brand new episodes of the best in true crime talk radio. Plus, it'll give you access to all of our past archives going back over 2 years. And there's some exclusive content that's made available as well. When you subscribe and you maintain your membership on January 1st, there around on our show, we're going to do a drawing from our listeners. All of you that are listening and subscribed will be entered automatically into that drawing for $500 of Tim's money. So help me help you take Tim's money, and we do it fairly and squarely. It only seems fair, Tim, that in a true crime show, we steal from you to give to others. But consider me the Robin Hood of true crime talk radio. Yeah, that's the way it's going to go. $500 of Tim's hard-earned money, and working in radio. Trust me, that's almost 6 years of actual work that Tim is about to give up to you guys because we love you so much. So this is what you do. Go subscribe right now, darknessradio.com. Click on the True Crime Tuesday banner, or go to patreon.com/True Crime Tuesday and never miss another minute in the best of true crime talk radio. All right, Mark, let's get back into the whole concept of poltergeist and possessions, their connections, and what are some of the weirdest cases that you came across when you were doing your research?
Well, I think the weirdest are usually maybe some from personal experience, in which people I knew who were involved in ceremonial magic were not always being careful with what they were doing, and they would end up having these very tangible presences along with them. And you would often have to confront these in terms of, I say, my friend, I said, you've got to fix this. You've got to get rid of them. And then, of course, they don't want to go. This is a buffet to them. This is their feeding. And, of course, they would have some kind of psychic attack. Now, what that means is the equivalent of a night terror. Okay, and I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with that notion that something is attacking you as you're half asleep, whether you can or can't move. Well, this was not half asleep. This was starting in sleep and then waking me up. In fact, actually confronting these kinds of invisible presences in my living room at times. Now, this is usually with friends, and we would straighten that out. But I have encountered essences, and of course, one was for a close friend who had terrible, I'm a wonderful person, but terrible life. I mean, a lot of horrible things that happened to them and their family. And just in passing, they said, well, I have this demon attached to this ball. I said, well, what do you mean? And, of course, there was this nice, beautiful black obsidian sphere that they had in their yard. And I had passed it on the way in, and I thought there was something a little odd about this. And we went over it, and my wife was present, and my wife suddenly realized that, what we were talking about, because this was, one of her friends, that we were serious about this not just being a psychological projection, but an actual other being associated with it.
Okay.
And I said to her, well, where did you get the sphere? She goes, I got it was in New Orleans. I was with this guy, and he was into voodoo, and, I picked it up, and I brought it. So she brings this home with her, and, of course, brought something along with it. So, of course, I said, well, I'll take care of it. And if I go out there... Is
this like a supernatural STD she brought back?
Yeah, pretty much.
Jeez.
Pretty much. And people do this all the time.
Right.
So, I go out there and I'm thinking, is this real? Is this not? You understand. I have to be not certain. It could be kind of make-believe because she's had so much trauma that she might just be projecting. So I go out there and I begin to say, appropriate prayers, and I can hear, and I feel this movement go from my left across to my front, across to my right, and I can hear inside the middle of my ear, now not outside my ear and not in my brain, if you will, but in the middle ear, like my ear canal, this tremendous screaming. As if you could scream the loudest at the top of your voice, that's where it was. And I thought, oh, that's real. Okay. So I finish it up for her. I said, well, I'll take care of things tonight. Well, that night, of course, my wife didn't know what had happened because she was inside. But that night, of course, she can't sleep. She goes, what's going on here? She suddenly began to realize some of the things that I experience and that this is real. Her friend, of course, had her house. She said the house was literally shaking that day because what we do in this process is we have to destroy everything associated with the entity. And according to the phrase, it's not a single letter of their names should remain. You have to destroy everything so that there's no way of coming back or reconnecting. And that's what I was doing the next day. And, that it doesn't sound terribly exciting at the time, maybe to your listener, but when you're in that emotionally charged environment and people that you love and care about are in it as well, it's like, your wife the other night with the stereo going on and off the TV. It can be disconcerting. With that then comes the actual phenomena, okay? And the actual phenomena can be that things move, things that disconnected, as we've seen with the phones and all of that. And you have to find a way not to feed into it because it all hooks into your fear. Or your arrogance of inclusion, of a specialness. That's why in the rituals, even like the Roman ritual that many of your listeners might be familiar with, you are specifically told, do not talk to the demon.
Right. Once you address it and give it attention, though, that starts to give it more power, right?
Well, you address it because you let it know, it knows that you're here. You know that it's there. It's hiding. So you have to always bring it completely out of hiding. You have to let it know that it has no options except to follow your commands. But you do not talk to it. You do not challenge it in the sense of give me information. Whenever anyone really falls into error, it's usually because they realize that this being has a certain amount of knowledge or information, assuming it's in a person, okay, has a certain amount of knowledge or information, and they get sucked in. Well, what do you mean? How do you know that? Well, how does this happen? Or so you can never address it in that manner. You have to just tell it, it's time to leave. This is what you're going to do. This is where you're going to go. And there's no coming back.
Doesn't that kind of lend into the ego side of things, though, that when you start believing you've got that power, that's when they screw with you? In some cases, we've discussed on the show over the years, the spirits, and this was kind of interesting, and just recently in the documentary, The Devil and Father Amworth, William Friedkin, the director of The Exorcist, follows famed exorcist Father Gabriel Amworth and does I think it was the 9th exorcism on this woman, and they think they finally broke her and she's clear, and they're all, oh, look what we've done, and then he starts doing blessings on her father, and suddenly she spazzes out again and starts yelling and showing signs that the possession is still taking place. When we start thinking that we have that ability to shut it down and command it to leave, doesn't that make us vulnerable as well?
Well, you have to understand there's more than one view of this. Most people are only familiar with the Roman Catholic Church's view of this because they're the last major Western entity that can field an exorcist. And most of the Protestant churches are dead in the water, okay, when it comes to this. You do have the deliverance movement, which probably manages to make things just as bad as it does good. Most of the other entities exist that can't do it. So, because they no longer have metaphysics, because they no longer function as spiritual entities. They function as political or economic entities, but not real guides or shepherds. Okay, living in Pennsylvania and having worked for some of these institutions, I was not surprised at all of the recent revelations regarding the widespread child abuse. So I think that needs to be understood. There's more than one view here. Okay, some of the Oriental views, such as in Vajrayana or in the other Tantras or in Taoism, are slightly different. Now, you do have the power in the sense that it is not like I'm wrestling with it. It's not but it's simply you have to give the command. You have to give the verbal order, okay? And you just stay firm with it. It's no different in some respects as when you have an obstinate child, okay? And you're saying, no, you're going to brush your teeth, and you're going to brush your teeth now. Now, that's not me going over and forcing the child to brush their teeth, but it's standing there letting them know they have no choice. Okay? Often within the Roman ritual, I have to tell you from having examined it, it's really more or less almost wearing the demon down, just almost boring it to death in some respects. I hate to put it in those terms, but if you pay attention to what's really going on, it's like, yeah, okay, I'm out of here because this isn't working anymore. And it doesn't mean it isn't unpleasant, okay? Not in the least, but that's really what happens in some ways. But you're right, the ego of since I'm special, I command the demons, I command the angels, I command the fill in the blank. That is the gateway to serious problems. And again, that's where a lot of these researchers, these ghost hunters, really open themselves up for some level of, social and personal deterioration.
Yeah, that's when I co-wrote my book on ghost hunting and the paranormal. Originally it was just written for everybody, but they decided to cash in on the Twilight market at the time because kids were so into the sparkly vampires and werewolves and ghosts that they wanted to kind of direct a book that way. We took a lot of heat for it, but I stood behind the idea that, you know what, their kids are going to do this either way, but wouldn't it be better to give them kind of a handheld guide on how we do what we do and why we do it, why it's so important. And the part that was really alarming to me was how many people and young people were jumping into the quote unquote demonology fray, because that was like the X Games of the paranormal, right? They wanted to go combat demons. So they read a couple of books on exorcism and they felt like they were ready to do battle. So I included a chapter in there, and it was funny. I'm friends with a couple of people involved in the Roman Catholic rite of exorcism and lay exorcism, and they've been instrumental in helping deliverance in quite a few cases. And when they found out I was writing a chapter on demonology, they came to me and they're like, "What the hell are you thinking?" And I said, "Well, just do me a favor. I won't run with the chapter till you've read it and given me your thumbs up or down." And I wrote them this chapter, and they're like, "Well, just be assured, if you're really leaving it up to me, most likely this chapter is not going to make your book." And I said, "Well, we'll give it a shot." So I wrote the chapter, sent it out, and both of them sent their thumbs up. They're like, "Go with that chapter. It's perfect." But it's in addressing that this isn't fun and games. This isn't something cool. And that messing in this realm can not only affect you, and maybe you think you've protected yourself, and maybe you're right. Maybe you're protected, but some of these darker forces don't just stop with you. Okay, Mark, you're so pious, you're so religious, you're right. I'm not going to get you, but I'm going to get your dog, and I'm going to get your kid, and I'm going to get your neighbor. And they start screwing with people that mean something to you. So you have to realize just what all is involved in entering the fray, and especially if you start getting arrogant or egotistical, which some of the Tim and I have talked to him, some of the investigators or exorcists, lay exorcists, people like that have admitted there have been times when they start forgetting that it's God that's doing the work, and they feel like they've got this holy rite and ritual down, and they're the one doing the work, that's when all hell breaks loose in their personal lives, and they become even less effective at these investigations, and sometimes put themselves and the victim in even more danger.
Right, because when you think you've got it down, that I really know myself, I don't have anything to worry about, that's when you fall into error. And, we don't have in the West a lot of really good religious or spiritual practices that are well known, that clear our path, so to speak. If you study Vajrayana Buddhism, the Tibetan Buddhism, there are certain practices that you do daily or weekly that are designed to fulfill your karmic debt to the host of invisible beings that you share the universe with. Okay? We don't do that. And a lot of exorcists don't do that. And a lot of priests don't do that. They do the Mass on Sunday, or if they're not a priest, a minister. But most people don't recognize that, that has to do with all of the cosmos, not just human beings, but all beings, everywhere. And this narrowness of focus is a real problem. I mean, a great book, in addition to these monographs, but a great book for your folks to read is George Hansen's The Trickster and the Paranormal, because it looks at a lot of the problems of when we explore this liminal domain. But, to go off into two important directions is what we've seen in the last, probably 5 to 10 years is a explosion in interest in demonology and goetic magic and these types of practices. And it's really taken off. The thing is, it's often disconnected from any sense of actual spiritual unfoldment. It's looked at as a technology of power, which it potentially is. That's a problem. And a lot of folks who I know in the esoteric and occult community, they don't want to address that. Because they're afraid of being looked at as being maybe a little too old school, a little too, we'll say maybe, pious or moralistic in that regard. But it is a problem. And that's why I said you have to have a good, firm spiritual practice where you focus on understanding your own mind. Because if you don't, the beings that you're dealing with will know it better.
Right, and they will have no problem tossing you around like a rag doll when you think that you've got them beat.
None at all.
Mark Stavish, our guest, as we are wrapping up another edition of the best in paranormal talk radio with Beyond the Darkness. In doing the research that you've done for the books and putting yourself out in the field, have you seen firsthand this activity take place? And from what scale to what scale? Have you seen, the car rolling across the floor all the way up to full-blown, vases being flung across the room? What is the extent of activity you've actually been witness to?
Yeah, one of the experiences that I write about in a book called The Magical World of Dr. Joseph Olszewski, which is a memoir that I have regarding this fellow that I knew. He was very well known for his work in ceremonial magic and alchemy, and I knew him for quite a few years. And one day he calls me, and he asks me to help him out. I said, of course, we're friends. I'll help you. I haven't heard from him for a few years, so I didn't know what was going on. And he had suffered a tremendous illness, a very strange kind of illness too, and a form of cancer. But I said, what's going on? And he asked me to come out to his house in the country, in rural Pennsylvania, and perform an exorcism for him. I said, okay. And I thought, this is interesting because he was quite skilled in this himself. What had gone wrong, essentially, was my question. So we, looked at several years back what he had undertaken, what he had done, and what had happened, and spoke with his wife and all of these things. And I said, okay, he knew what we needed to do, so it was fairly easy for my part in some respects. But I had to, again, destroy everything associated with what was happening, what had brought the phenomena on. I remember hearing once, just as a side example, of someone saying, oh, well, we were having trouble with this Ouija board, so this shaman came out and told us to put it in some water and break the connection. And like a friend of mine and I are watching the story and saying, well, that's stupid. Just burn it.
But now we've heard on the other side, you burn it, and that can cause other issues. It can release spirits. So I mean,
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Okay.
No, because you want it out of your realm. You want it out of your world. If you burn it properly, it's not going to come back. You direct them. The problem is these people don't understand how to direct the entity into something. If you look at the gospel said when Jesus performs the exorcism in the Gospel of Mark, they say, tell us where to go, and he sends them into the herd of swine. Now, the point is, you can tell them where to go. You can bind them, okay, if you know what you're doing. Most of these folks don't know what they're doing. They just kind of get them out, and then they go roam free anyhow. So my point is, I get out there, and we collect the stuff together, and I have to create a burn bin for it, a burn barrel, and go through the ritual as we ritually purify everything and burn it to an ash, which takes a tremendous amount of work because you need heat for this stuff. So we get it going, and it's taking hours to do this. Now, what is interesting is, as this is occurring, just as soon as we start with the ritual, we go from a more or less clear blue sky to clouds, okay? And it's, those dark clouds, and it's coming over here. I said, oh, geez, okay. And the person who's helping me is like, well, what do we do? I said, well, we have to burn it to an ash. We have to get rid of it, so go get some umbrellas. And as we're doing this, constantly working at the fire, stoking the fires, repeating the same prayers over and over and over again, okay, it begins to rain. And my only concern was this, that we get the fire going large enough and hot enough so that we can get everything taken care of fairly quickly. And at that point, at one point, right as we're done, right as it's over, and we can kind of let this smolder for the rest of the night and the day following, we get this cloudburst. Boom. So this psychic energy, is very real and affects the environment. Not just on this, a car moves across the room, but it actually can affect the physical environment as well. And then, of course, where people say the house shakes, or the room shakes, or things fall over. People around were looking. We were in a rural area, but the people who were with me and involved knew what was going on. This was a tremendous amount of release of energy, and it needs to be directed. And, of course, for myself, I ended up with some kind of irregular health issues for about 3 to 6 months after. Fortunately, nothing serious, just minor annoyances. But that's why you see these folks who do this a lot. They don't do more. They really often don't do as many as you see, like in that film, doing them every day. They do a few a year, maybe tops, because it takes such a tremendous amount out of them.
Right, and getting involved into that, you start to have those residual effects to your health. When you have had that happen to you, how long does it take you to bounce back?
I say it's about 3 to 6 months. And it wasn't a big deal because it wasn't anything significant, but you notice it. And you have to go and have a regular practice where, again, you clarify your psychic channels, you clarify your chakras, your psychic centers, where you do a variety of practices along those lines. You have to have that. That's why these guys get sick. That's why my friend got this strange kind of cancer. Because if you look at the history of a lot of the people involved in exorcism, the deliverance ministry, they all get these weird kinds of cancer, or blood diseases, or bone diseases. So you have to have a good spiritual practice to keep that from happening, and often they don't. Even same thing with health and well-being. Like you're saying, the mediums often suffer from a tremendous amount of muscular dystrophy and obesity.
Huh. So, this is something to take into consideration, kids. So you don't just think this is all glam and glory. You're not necessarily going to turn into the next Ed and Lorraine Warren by doing this. You're actually opening yourself up for, quite a bit of residual effect in your lifetime. And is it worth it?
And that's it. Is it worth it? And what's the reason? Because you have to have a mechanism. You have to have a life outside of it. Most of these people aren't going to be clergy, where they have living in a monastic or cloistered environment where they just have something to go back to and don't have a day job. We see too many people who have day jobs, in a sense, destroying their lives because they get so consumed into the research of the paranormal. Because it's fascinating, it's exciting, and some really interesting and strange and unexplainable stuff happens. But it's like a video game. It's more exciting than real life, and then it just takes over. So you have to make sure, you have to guard yourself against that. And by the way, in accordance with your promotion there, good, healthy eating and exercise is very important. Healthy mind, healthy body.
Mark, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. We made it through the episode relatively danger-free, so thank you for coming back and spending some time with us, and I'm sure we'll visit with you again here in the future on Beyond the Darkness. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If people want to keep up with you, what is the best way to look into your work and books? What is there a website that's best?
They can just go to Amazon for the books. Just look up Mark Stavish on Amazon. They'll get a laundry list. And if they like, the best thing to do is go to Blogspot and look up Vox Hermes. Of course, they can send us an email at info@hermeticinstitute.org, the Institute for Hermetic Studies. They Google that. They'll get a lot of hits. So info@hermeticinstitute.org. Send us an email, and we'll send you some information on where to go sign up for newsletters and rather regular publications and postings.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you all for tuning in and making us a part of your world. Welcome to September, everyone. We will be back again with you next weekend. I will be out of town. I think Tim will be presenting you with a couple of brand new episodes, but I'll see if I can call in and maybe share a couple of weird stories. So be safe, be kind, love one another, and we'll talk to you again right here on Beyond the Darkness.